As a survivor of spiritual abuse, it can be really easy to look back at your past experiences and ask yourself, why didn't I trust my gut? Why didn't I listen to my intuition, that inner voice that I kept hearing, warning me of danger? A lot of people ask that question, not only people who are survivors of spiritual abuse, but people who have been survivors of other traumatic experiences and other types of abuse. And so today I'm going to talk about why we ignore our intuition and our discernment. My name is Dr. Felicia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. And I'm the owner of Skill Set Counseling, a practice where I focus on the treatment of spiritual abuse as well as OCD. So, back to the topic at hand. When we think about our intuition and our discernment, we have to remember that those are faculties that operate on a very different level from other sorts of skills that we use every day. Right. So if we think about just, whatever skills you use each day, they probably don't rely on a lot of unseen and unquantifiable constructs, right? If you're working at a computer, for instance, you see the screen, you see the keyboard. A lot of what we do is related to our five senses. And when you think about that, and then you shift to the realm of intuition and discernment and how we use that, very different skills. Also, keep in mind that when you are in a spiritually abusive environment, um, intuition and discernment are either completely dismissed or they can be weaponized. And I talk about how both of those things happen in spiritually abusive environments, especially the latter. And so, if you've had those types of experiences, it can be understandably difficult to now switch to listening to your intuition and your discernment. Um, when there are I would say lots of institutions nowadays that focus on being nice instead of being good. And so when we think about that, oh, we have to be nice. Nice is about being polite and socially presentable, but it really doesn't have much to do with actual goodness, kindness, and authenticity. So I'm sure you can resonate with this, but let's say you are expressing something about somebody that you don't like. And I'm not talking about in a gossipy form. Maybe it's a meeting that you all have or something. And maybe you're talking about candidates or candidates for a job. And this is particularly within a spiritual setting. And you say, I didn't like um person so and so's way of like delivering a message, right? It just didn't resonate with me. The first thing you're going to probably hear is, we shouldn't judge people. Don't judge, don't judge. If you don't have anything nice don't say anything at all. And so when you are in a situation where you keep getting that feedback all the time, don't judge, don't judge, it makes it hard for you to sharpen and enhance your skills of intuition and discernment. Think about people. This is a story, or not a story, but a scenario that breaks my heart that I've heard multiple times. It's like a little kid will tell their parent that they don't like a particular adult. And instead of the parent listening to the adult and saying, well, why don't you like so and so, or tell me more about it? They're like, oh, well, that's not nice. We don't say mean things about people. And then later on, that child is victimized, or maybe they were victimized, and them telling their parent that they didn't like that particular adult was their cry for help. It really saddens me a lot. And even if the child is not victimized, the point is we need to listen, especially to those who can't defend themselves, who are in weaker and vulnerable positions. And so a lot of people have resonated with this experience where they've said, they didn't like a particular person. They felt uncomfortable. They couldn't quantify why, but they were dismissed. And so, when you come from environments like this, either where intuition and discernment is completely ignored, dismissed, or in situations where it's abused and used against you as a way of like getting information from you or trying to control you, you end up having sort of like a love-hate relationship with your own intuition and discernment. And so it's important to understand, first of all, what your own hesitancy is about using that skill. You could have been in a situation where somebody misused their intuition and discernment to try and control you. And so when you pick up something from your own intuition and discernment, you're like, oh, I don't want to be like that person who, controls people because of what they claim they sensed. And then on the other hand, you could also have been one who was frequently dismissed when you had a particular intuition about something. Maybe you were told that you were too judgmental, too critical, things like that. So it's really important, again, to understand why we ignore those things. Another thing I want you to think about is that when you ignored your intuition and discernment, what had that cost you? For some of us, we've been through experiences where we didn't pay attention to those red flags. It's important to understand what that cost us so that we can feel more comfortable and trusting our intuition. Now, a lot of people don't understand what intuition is. And that's something that I don't have a lot of time to explain in this video, but I would encourage you to look it up and try and see what definition you feel best accurately describes it to you. But intuition basically can bypass, our logic. There's a really good book I recommend that you read if you haven't read it already, called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. And he talks about a lot of, just different scenarios in his book. And I think in one book, there was an individual that went into a building, they were at work or something, and they got a package, and he didn't get the package. There was a package like on the office table, and everybody was like, "Oh, a package, it's to us." And he felt something off. He's like, something's not right. And so he left the office to clear his head. And like 2 seconds later, there was an explosion. There was a bomb in there. And later on, when they found out, and they were trying to understand, like, basically they're able to figure out what the content of the package was and what it looked like on the outside. And he said something about, he didn't know why at the time. He just knew he had to get out of there. And they found out later that, I haven't read the book in a long time. So if you've read it and you can tell me in the comments, please do if I'm getting the story wrong. But basically, there was the package was too neat. It was like the letters and everything were put in such a way that was really meticulous. And I guess whoever this bomber that did that to maybe to conceal their identity. I don't know the whole story about it, but the point is there was something off about that package, and what that man saw, he couldn't put it together, but he knew it and he left. My point with all of this is that our intuition and our discernment bypass our logic. I try to explain it like touching a hot stove, right? When you put your finger on a hot stove, you don't say, "Oh, gosh, it's really hot. I should remove my finger." It's an instant response. And we all have a spirit. And so I believe that our intuition is there as a way, as like a reflex to protect us. We might not be able to understand why, and why something feels off to us. And sometimes people ignore that too because they feel like they can't explain why it's off. That's another thing. We internalize these messages about being nice and not judging. So there may be somebody that you meet and you're like, there's just something off about that person, and everybody loves this person. And when you talk to them and when other people talk to them, you can't point to any one thing that's wrong, but in your spirit, you're like, something's off about this person, or something is off about this place. Pay attention to that. Now, am I saying that every time we think that something is off about a person or a place, we're correct? No, there are times where that could be being fueled by other things like negative life experiences and things like that. But I want you to be in the place where you don't just write that off and dismiss it as, "Oh, I'm being negative," or, "Oh, I'm being manipulative," or, "I'm judgmental," or whatever. Pay attention to that and try and understand why it is you feel the way you do in that moment. And you may not even be able to understand why, but don't dismiss it. sometimes for people, it can also be hard. Another reason why we ignore our intuition and our discernment is because we might have been wrong, right? So sometimes we can meet somebody for the first time and have a really good impression of them. And then after we meet them, or not meet them, so I have encounters with them multiple times, then we're like, oh, I don't know about this person. But we also tend to want to stick to our first impressions of somebody. And so we're like, well, what was it? I thought this person was okay. And anywhere, I mean, you get confused and things like that. But we also have to remember, and this is there's a YouTuber named Cassandra Mack, and she does a lot of really good videos on discernment and things like that. And she said something that I really resonate with in terms of understanding this concept is that when you meet somebody for the first time, most of the time you're not meeting that person, you're meeting their representative. And I like how she said their representative. And so of course, if you see somebody, let's say you're dating somebody and the first date, everything goes great. And then maybe by the 10th or 11th date, you're kind of over it, right? Well, that's because the first few dates, that real person, the real them was not the person in attendance of the date at the date, it was their representative, right? And when we representative, their best version of themselves. Now, we all do this, right? We always want to, there's nothing wrong with wanting to put the best foot forward. The problem is when that is done intentionally to deceive and to gain somebody's trust and then to harm them later. As we meet anybody, we're going to see different layers and different, just different sides of a person. And so, you know, think about these things. And I'd also like to hear from you in the comments. Are there any reasons you believe that we tend to dismiss our intuition and discernment? Why do you think that happens? And if you've done so, what was your reason for doing so? It can be really hard to do that, to figure out why we dismiss our intuition and our discernment. Sometimes that might not even be coming from us. It could be coming from somebody else. Somebody else might have like a weird feeling about somebody and they're telling us, hey, like, I don't know about this person. There's the story of Selena, a Mexican singer. She was unalived by the head of her fan club. But it's interesting that I was reading an article about it, and it said that Selena's dad did not trust that woman. He's like, there's something off about her. She seems like she's obsessed with you. You need to keep your distance from her. And it says it's in the Wikipedia. It says that Selena dismissed him because she felt like he always had like negative opinions about everybody. That's neither here nor there. I don't know whether that's true or not, but she was wanting to believe the best and trust people and things like that. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for her. So we need to get rid of this idea that we have to be nice to people all the time and we have to believe the best. I have a video on this channel that says you don't have to believe the best about everybody. In fact, I recommend that you don't do that. It's actually it's not a wise way to go through life. And I explain why in that video. So anyway, love to hear from you all in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you'd like to book a free consultation, go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com. I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye-bye.